The Greens have never been simple, harmless tree huggers. They're a party of the radical left, a party that stands shoulder to shoulder with some of the vilest elements of our society, a party that would make life miserable for ordinary people were they ever to gain any significant power. They are a party of environmental extremism who put tackling the bogeyman of climate change above everything, including humanity itself, and who would rather see people shiver and starve in the cold and dark than have cheap, reliable energy. They're a bunch of clowns, in other words, but dangerous clowns nonetheless. So it was great news to see their support in the European elections plummet as the long-suffering people of Europe, who have had to put up with insane climate policies for so many years, finally started to wake up to the alternatives. What's interesting is how many younger people are rejecting the leftist parties in favour of the right. They're realising that those leftist policies don't actually deliver the kind of world they want to live in, and they're looking for an alternative. Whilst this may not be the hammer blow to net zero that Europe desperately needs, it will certainly make the policymakers think very hard about whether to continue pushing the mad net zero by 2050 mandates against the tide of public opinion. Welcome back to MGuy, British engineer and lawyer, now Sydney-based YouTuber. Be sure to follow me on the usual socials for more content, links in the description, and please make sure you're subscribed and have enabled all notifications so you don't miss out on any future videos. The UK Telegraph's reporting of this is hilarious, labelling those who voted against the Green blob as hard right. It's ridiculous, but nowadays, if you hold what would have been called traditional conservative values like, for example, small government, low taxes, individual responsibility, family values, robust defence forces and strong borders, you're now a far-right extremist. Welcome to the club. That just shows how dramatically the Overton window has shifted to the left in the last 30 years, and how urgently it needs to be moved back to the centre. Europe turns its back on green policy and embraces the right. Sunday's election result displays stark changes in voters' attitudes as eco-policy moves aside in favour of immigration. It was the night that Europe turned its back on net zero and embraced the right. The European Greens experienced the second largest decline of all parties, dropping to just 7% after Sunday's European Parliament elections. The gains the Greens made in 2019, when it secured its highest ever vote share off the back of Greta Thunberg's mass climate protests, had been effectively eradicated overnight. Terry Reintke, German MEP and President of the Greens, said, "We know that the gains made by the far right in some countries, particularly France, Germany and Austria, will be extremely concerning for all of us who fight for democracy and freedom." Ah, yes. Just as in the United States, if people vote for anybody we don't like, that's a threat to democracy. Funny that, because to me it looks like that's exactly what democracy means. It was a pattern mirrored across the EU. In the 14 countries with Greens elected in the previous election, 10 saw a decline or stalemate in support. In France, the Ecologist Party saw the number of MEPs elected fall from 13 to just 5. In Germany, the Grüne, previously the second largest party in the EU parliamentary crop, fell to third place, its MEPs falling from 21 to just 13. Still too many. Belgium, Portugal, Austria and Finland reported similar declines. It wasn't only the Greens who suffered. Emmanuel Macron, the leader of the country where the Paris Agreement on climate change was struck, was humiliated. His centrist Renew group had seen its MEPs decline by 23 seats. Its overall share in Parliament had fallen from 15% to 11%. In France, his drubbing at the hands of hard right Marine Le Pen, who has backed farmers in their fight against EU climate rules, saw his party fall into third place as the hard right took pole position. Renew and the Greens both champion liberal and climate-conscious values that have increasingly fallen out of favour with the electorate. Good thing too is all I can say. So-called proportional representation systems like we have here in Australia mean that the Greens get a massively over-representation in the Parliament. No less than 11 senators out of 76 in the Australian upper house are drawn from this bunch of mad extremists. And as a result, they hold far too much control over the workings of government. Their share of the vote hovers around 11%, but they have nearly 15% of the Senate seats. But Labour and the Greens are joined at the hip, and until or unless Labour stops relying on preferences from the Greens, this nonsense will continue. But it's interesting to see younger people who traditionally would favour the left, thanks to 12 years of lefty brainwashing in school and then another 3 or 4 at university, looking more to right-leaning parties because, as has always been the case, the left promises big and always fails to deliver. As Margaret Thatcher once said, the trouble with socialism is that you eventually run out of other people's money. How Europe's young voters flock to the hard right. Jordan Bardella, the handsome RN president, is one of the far-right politicians stealing a march on rivals with savvy use of TikTok. Unbuttoning his carefully ironed white shirt, Jordan Bardella took a sip of water at a sweltering political rally during his European election campaign and apologised for the pause by saying, "I'm already getting hot." "You're the one making us hot," screamed a girl from the young crowd. The French call it Bardella mania. Wherever the handsome 28-year-old star of France's hard-right national rally RN goes, he is mobbed above all by the young. Such adulation morphed into electoral triumph on Sunday, when 31.4% of the French voted for Marine Le Pen's impeccably dressed, carefully groomed and well-spoken protégé, offering his party a projected 30 seats in the European Parliament. That is more than twice the seats won by Emmanuel Macron's Renaissance Party, which scored a paltry 14.6%, 13 seats, and finished only just ahead of the Socialists on 13.8%. But it was not just Mr. Bardella who was drawing swarms of young voters. Germany's hard-right Alternative for Germany, AfD, also surged in the polls, propelled in part by voters under the age of 30. One poll published on Sunday showed that 32% of 18 to 34-year-olds voted for the RN in France, more than double the total of the 2019 European elections. In Germany, the AfD saw an 11% jump in its vote share among 16 to 24-year-olds, claiming a total of 16%. It saw big jumps in 25 to 44-year-olds too. In the last European election, young people in Europe overwhelmingly voted for Green parties in what was heralded as a green wave. However, interest has waned among the generation that grew up during the COVID pandemic and frets about war in Europe, an uncertain job market, and a lack of affordable housing. Yep, 100% correct. Fortunately, young people are still smart enough, in spite of the awful education they now receive, to realise that the promises of the left never come true, and now they're looking to alternatives. Australia is typically a decade or so behind Europe and the US, so as we here in Australia are still stuck with thick-as-pig-shit politicians like Albo and Bowen pushing ridiculous net zero policies, Europe may be realising that the alternatives might be better. It's amazing what could be achieved in the 21st century if we removed the shackles of climate panic and just got on with life. Wouldn't that be refreshing?